Hello, everyone, and welcome back to another episode of Our Golden 20s. I'm Sadie, and I'm joined with my co-host Tegan, and we are here to celebrate International Women's Day.
Woohoo!
Happy International Women's Day to all of our women listeners, which is like 80% of our listeners, I think, which is actually kind of surprising. I thought it was going to be like 100% women for some reason.
Yeah.
But every time I look at like our listener stats, I'm like, hey, we have a few guys listening too.
Yeah,
so
a few guys,
hello
a few
to you as well.
non-binary,
yeah,
a few non-specified, which I didn't even know that was an option. But
there
I
you
love
go. Yeah. So today's episode, I feel like I really hyped it up at the end of last week's episode, if you guys made it that far. But it is kind of like unlike any episode we've done before, where we're just going to be celebrating International Women's Day by sharing some stories on women who inspire us. So we have just like kind of picked, I was going to say like randomly picked, but obviously these people inspire us for a reason. So we're just going to kind of go into their stories, how they've created change, or, you know, the causes that they're passionate about, or whatever it is that makes them so amazing, as well as, you know, maybe some like family members and just like that kind of thing.
Yeah, I can't wait because I feel like, I don't know, I'm surrounded by women who inspire me, and I read like autobiographies of women who inspire me, but I don't get to talk about it very often.
Girl, now's your chance.
Yeah.
This is something that I can't shut up about ever. Like, I feel people have their cause kind of thing that they really get like riled up about. Mine is being a woman.
Okay.
Like,
Great.
I'm just like a huge like feminist, and this is something that I've like, I don't know, I feel like it's just been in like recent years, probably since I started working, that I'm just like, yes, I identify as a feminist, and like, yes, that is a good thing. You know what I mean? Like, I feel the word feminist doesn't sit right with some people, but I'm like, no, I'm a proud feminist, and we're going to kind of get into why that is. But for those of you who maybe aren't familiar with International Women's Day, or you know that it's a thing, but you don't really know what it's about, maybe we'll just start by explaining a little bit about what it is. And I grabbed these things right from the International Women's Day website so that there's no, you know, like confusion, or like it's not interpreted a different way than it was meant. But essentially, International Women's Day, which is today, which okay guys, hold on before I get into it. Tegan had this episode idea probably when we started brainstorming episodes
pretty
for
early.
the podcast, and we were both like, yes, this is a great idea. And then when we started planning for March, I was like, oh my God, Tegan, International Women's Day is on a Tuesday. Like, we're going to have a podcast episode drop that day. We need to do your Women Who Inspire Us episode. So that is what brought us here. But anyways, all of that being said, every March 8th is International Women's Day, and it is a global day celebrating the social, economic, cultural, and political achievements of women. Every year it has a different theme. This year's theme is Break the Bias, which you can find on social media, hashtag Break the Bias. And on their website it says about the theme: imagine a gender equal world, a world free of bias, stereotypes, and discrimination, a world that's diverse, equitable, and inclusive, a world where difference is valued and celebrated. Together we can forge women's equality. Collectively we can all break the bias. Hashtag break the bias.
Love it.
Yeah, right? So whether deliberately or unconsciously, bias makes it difficult for women to move ahead. And I feel like we've had a past episode all about being a woman in the workplace, where, you know, we've talked about our personal experiences with how being a woman in the workplace has had its challenges for us personally. But this year's theme is really all about how people know this bias exists, but just knowing it exists isn't enough. We actually need to be like taking action to level the playing field. So I feel like I've been rambling on forever, but I feel like why I've come to the conclusion I'm a feminist and why I'm so proud to be one is because I'm extremely fortunate to be surrounded by super strong, powerful, amazing women who inspire me every single day. So, of course, I think I have the most amazing mom in the entire world. I have two older sisters who are extremely overachieving individuals that like pave the way for me as, you know, the baby sister, but they're just such an inspiration. They're so good at everything they do. I have my grandma, who I am going to talk about later in this episode, friends, mentors, my personal trainer, my therapist, even like the podcast guests we've had. Like, I just feel like I'm constantly surrounded by really strong women, and I just feel like that's why I get so like passionate talking about it, you know. And even the company that I'm currently working for right now, the president of the company and a lot of members of our executive leadership team are all women, which is very rare.
Yeah.
But it's something that I really value about the company I work for.
So did you want to start us off, Sadie, with maybe a tale of a woman who inspires you?
I would love to. And I already told Tegan that there's an 80% chance that I'm going to cry. And I really hope I don't, because I feel like there's been times like in prepping for past podcast episodes where I'm like, I'm definitely going to cry talking about this, and I haven't yet. So hopefully I don't. But the first woman I'm going to talk about, it's pretty like short and sweet. So I feel it's a good way to kick this off. But the first person I want to talk about is my grandma. And I feel like my grandma and I have a very special like bond and relationship, because a lot of people probably don't know this about me, but for the first year of my life, I actually lived with my grandparents, still with my parents and sisters. You know, the whole gang was there. But I feel like, you know, that really created a really special bond for between my grandma and I. And then it also just like shows from there how she was so involved in my childhood and so involved in my life. So why I chose my grandma, not my mom, not my sisters, like I said, they are very, you know, inspirational to me as well. But my grandma has been through so much, and I just think it's the perfect opportunity to give her a little shout out and tell her that how much she inspires me. So by the time my grandma was my age, which is 26, she was widowed and had 2 young kids. So she was a single mom in the 70s, I believe. Yeah, early 70s, raising 2 kids and working as a waitress, all while putting herself through nursing school so that she could get a better job for her family. She had some help from my great-grandparents because she lived with them, but she also paid to renovate the house that they lived in twice to accommodate their living situation. So she really didn't have, you know, too much financial support or even like support raising her kids, because she was doing a lot of things on her own. However, later in life, she did remarry. So she's now married to my papa. And like I was saying, she really made my sisters and my childhood extremely special. And I feel like, you know, it's kind of crazy to see what she's overcome like in her lifetime, how she raised my dad, you know, how she's then kind of like also like really helped raise me and my sisters and everything, despite, you know, all of the stuff she had to go through to get to where she's at today. And I feel like she continues to be the rock of my family, and she's everyone's support system. If it's extended cousins way out west, if it's, you know, whoever, she's just like there for everybody. And she's just like so much joy. Like when my grandma's just like, I don't know, when she just gets this like little giggle, oh God, here I go, I'm gonna like cry. But it's just the absolute best. So I feel like she's also somebody who knows like literally everything, you know, like I feel like people are like, my dad knows everything, and my dad definitely does, but he learned it all from my grandma, where if you like ask her any question about like how to bake things, like how to take care of house plants, like literally anything, she knows the answer to it. So that is also just like goes show, I don't know how amazing she is, but she's always there to cheer me on and provide guidance and advice throughout my adult life too. So that's how we're kicking off the episode.
I love it.
Oh, God. So dumb. I always tell you guys how I'm like such an emotional person. And now here it is. I'm actually living that out today. Not just yelling at you guys some advice to how to live your best life.
Well, I feel like grandmas are, I don't know, they're such a great, this sounds very weird and clinical, but they're such a great resource. Like, the best advice is to like sit down and talk to your grandma, just like ask her questions about life, because obviously like as millennials or Gen Zs or Zs for the Americans, we have like our own hardships, but like some of the hardships that your grandparents went through are crazy. Like I had a grandparent that had to immigrate to Canada with the assumption that she would never see her family again because that's how it was back then.
Yeah.
My husband's grandma, she lost babies as miscarriages and then eventually adopted. And it's like, you forget about how easy certain things are.
Yeah.
And that's why I feel like it's, if you have grandparents still with you and you have a relationship with them, it's the best to just like sit down and ask them about their life.
Yeah, for sure. Because I feel like too, we forget how they had like lifetimes before we did. You know what I mean? Like they've seen so much and there was so much more to their life before like we came along as their grandchild, you know? So of course they have so much more experience and things that they can, and like wisdom and like lessons they learned to share with you. So I love that. Yeah. I feel that was maybe a little bit all over the place, but I don't know, trying not to cry, and then I ended up crying anyway. So anyways, that is my first woman who inspires me.
Great.
Yes. What about you, Tag?
Well,
who inspires you?
I only brought one woman to the table, and this was the woman who basically I watched a documentary about her and I was like, we should have a podcast episode where I get to talk about her because I'm obsessed. And this is Jane Fonda. And I've talked about Jane Fonda before on the podcast. I've talked about this documentary. It's an HBO
me
one.
to watch it.
Yeah.
And I did. And
oh, great.
I loved it.
Yeah.
I
Jane's
knew nothing about her. Yeah.
Yeah. I didn't really know anything about her too, because when we were younger, she said she was retired from acting.
Okay.
She's no longer retired.
Right.
Thank God. We've still got Jane. But so I didn't really know anything about her really until I started watching Grace and Frankie on Netflix.
Yeah.
Which she's in and is fantastic. And I was like, what's the deal with Jane Fonda? I should look it up. And then mind blown.
And then here we are.
Yeah. So I'm just going to kind of talk a little about Jane Fonda and how cool she is.
Yeah.
And honestly, she's a grandma age, so
yeah. And I feel like Jane Fonda, like you're going to get into this kind of like, you know, with points of time with when these things are happening and like, you know, a timeline kind of her story. But I think that's another thing when we're going back talking about like grandma or grandma age is like, we just also need to remember, especially talking about like women, like women doing this in the 60s and 70s is very different than like women doing this in 2022. You know what I mean? And I feel like that's why it's like women of like, grandma age, you know, like are especially admirable for doing as much as they did. And like, in a totally different like society.
But and
anyway.
there were much more like repercussions. Like you think of Jane Fonda calling herself a feminist and how that could be career suicide compared to Beyonce calling herself a feminist, which was then like, yes, Beyonce slay, you know, it's and just then, times are changing.
100%.
So Miss Jane Fonda, first off, she's half Canadian, so we love her for that. But besides that, she is a nepotism baby, but that's fine because her parents were famous. However, at the age of 12, her mother died by suicide, and she was left with just her father, who she did not have a close relationship with. And she struggled a lot to try and please him and found that he was impossible to please pretty much. Before she began acting, she was a model and appeared twice on the cover of Vogue because she's very beautiful. But in an attempt to impress her father and his sort of beauty standards, she did become bulimic and struggled with that for a lot of her life. And she acted, obviously, in a bunch of movies, and she was nominated for Academy Awards. However, despite all this success, she still became politically active. So during the 60s, she was very supportive of the civil rights movement, which for like a rich white lady is rare, especially like a rich white lady in Hollywood. And she was very opposed to the Vietnam War, which now seems like, whatever. But back then, being publicly against it was not a great idea because you were supposed to be supporting your troops. At one point, she went to visit Vietnam in 1972 so that she could see sort of the damage that was happening there. And during this trip, she was photographed seated on a anti-aircraft gun. And this is a very famous photo that basically got sent to America and earned her the nickname Hanoi Jane. And as it effectively blacklisted her. No one would hire her because she was so hated. It became standard that on any U.S. Naval Academy, you would shout "Good night, Jane Fonda," and the entire company of shipmen would reply "Good night, bitch."
Oh gosh.
That's how universally hated she was. This practice has now been prohibited, I should say. But, you know, she was not well liked and she was okay with that. She has recently expressed some regrets around like her methods. Not that she was against the war, but that she should have been more tactful, which...
Yeah, you kind of have to like go through it to learn that, though.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Like,
yeah.
Yeah.
She was also a drug addict at the time. And so she's like, I wasn't thinking straight also. But her reasoning behind being against the Vietnam War was that she thought that it was un-American because young Americans were being sent there to die, essentially.
Right.
Not that communism was good, which is how it was interpreted.
Yeah. I think I was just gonna say, I think it's also like just so admirable to me that she like actually went to Vietnam, you know what I mean? And like actually like was like, this is something I'm passionate about and like I want to educate myself about, and the best way to do that is to like go, you know? And like it is unfortunate that that one photograph like had all these like really negative like impacts on her career and whatever, but like I don't know, I feel like not to totally sidetrack you, but just I feel like as women it's so easy to like get involved in a cause and be like, yeah, I support this, yeah, I support that, but then that's about all we do, you know? Like we just like verbalize it. But I just love how she's like, I don't know, just like a go-getter. Like
she
when
walked
you watch,
the walk.
Yeah, exactly, that's it. She walked the walk.
Yeah. And I don't think that she regrets the damage that her opposition to the war did to her career, just the damage that it might have done to soldiers, say, who felt unsupported.
Yeah, 100%.
And she still gets hate. In 2005, a man who I'm not even going to say his name, who was a veteran, was arrested for disorderly conduct in Kansas City, Missouri, because he spat chewing tobacco in her face during a book signing.
Yeah, that's not okay.
Yeah, later he told reporters that he considered it a debt of honor, adding, "She spit in our faces for 37 years. It was absolutely worth it. There are a lot of veterans who would love to do what I did." Fonda refused to press charges, which is nice. A lot nicer than maybe I would have been.
Yeah. I feel like that's her like accepting maybe she handled it wrong. You know what I mean? Or not handled it wrong, sorry. She can understand his side of the story a little bit, you know? Like,
and also
her
like
saying
he's a veteran.
Yeah.
Like what?
Being the bigger person.
Fine. Yeah. And so in 2013, it was later revealed that Fonda was one of approximately 1,600 Americans whose communication between 1967 and 1973 were monitored by the United States National Security Agency.
What?
I'm trying to highlight how big of a deal Jane Fonda was.
Yes.
Because I feel like looking back at it, it's like, yeah, whatever. But it's like, no, there was some shit going down with her. And she was fearlessly just like, yep, come and get me. In 1970, she was arrested by authorities at Cleveland Hopkins International Airport on suspicion of drug trafficking for really no reason, but okay. Her luggage was searched when she re-entered the United States after she participated in an anti-war college speaking tour in Canada, and several small baggies containing pills were seized. She told them that they were vitamins, but she was booked by police and then released on bond. Fonda was told that the arresting officer had been told by Nixon of the White House to arrest her. She tried to explain they were vitamins. They didn't listen. And she believes that it was because they were hoping a scandal would cause the college speeches to be canceled and ruin her respectability. Lab tests eventually confirmed that the pills were vitamins and the charges were dropped. However, Fonda's mugshot from this arrest, in which she raises her fist in a sign of solidarity, has since become a widely published image of the actress. And I love it. I'm getting it printed so I can hang it in my house. And she sells merch of it. So
good.
She's making that money. Thanks, Nixon. She also was a huge LGBTQ ally long before it was acceptable and hip. She appeared in a video of a 1979 interview during the White Night riots in San Francisco after the assassination of Harvey Milk, the first openly gay politician in California. During the interview, she was asked if the gay community was still being discriminated against, to which she replied that they are culturally, physiologically, economically, and politically being discriminated against. Fonda was then asked if the gay community has used her as an advocate, and she replied that she hopes they will use her, though she stressed that they are a very powerful moment and they don't need me. But they like me. They know by working together we can be stronger than either entity is by itself. So yes, Jane Fonda. She's also been a big supporter of Indigenous Americans, also before it was hip. So essentially, after all of her political activism, she was blacklisted. No one would hire her. No one would make a movie with her. But
which is crazy.
Yeah,
like
that someone would be that extreme. But like, I want to say the times are different.
Yeah.
But they also feel the same. But like, she was very supportive of the Black Panther movement, which like were considered a terrorist party at the time. And yeah, she was blacklisted. And then in 1982, she released her very first exercise video. This is where
iconic.
The tables have turned. It was titled Jane Fonda's
exercise
Workout.
video? Okay, here we go.
Go Jane. And this all started because she used to do ballet to stay thin, and she suffered an injury. Couldn't do it anymore. So then she got more into like strength and aerobics and was like, hey, this is fun. So she created her own workout. And Jane Fonda's workout became the highest selling home video of the next few years and sold over 1 million copies. The video's release led many people to buy the then new VCR in order to watch and perform at home.
I love
the impact. The impact this lady has.
What's so funny is I think about how, you know, in my recent like training journey, I love working out because it's a great way to release stress. You know what I mean? But my stress is often like the work meeting I just had. Yeah. You know, Jane Fonda had so much. Like,
yeah, her stress is off the charts.
Her stress is off the charts. She's being watched by like the American government. You know, like everybody hates her. Yeah. Of course she started working out to release her stress. Like, I don't think that's why she started working out, but you know what I mean? It's just kind of funny, but also really good perspective to have.
Yeah. And a lot of her workouts are on YouTube, I will say. So if you want to try it out.
So 80s. Like, so good.
And it's intense. Like, she's
a good burn.
Strong. Yeah. In 2001, she established the Jane Fonda Center for Adolescent Reproductive Health, which aims to help prevent teen pregnancy. And obviously, she's been a feminist long before that, but this is kind of the start of her ramping up towards that. In a 2017 interview with Brie Larson, published by People magazine, she also stated, "One of the great things the women's movement has done is to make us realize that rape and abuse is not our fault. We were violated and it's not right." She said, "I've been raped, I've been sexually abused as a child, and I've been fired because I wouldn't sleep with my boss." She said, "I always thought it was my fault, that I didn't do or say the right thing. To know young girls who've been raped and didn't even know it was rape, they think it must have been because I said no the wrong way." And even if you look at her filmography, there's a through line of feminism through it all. So this has obviously also been an important theme in her life. Even like you look at one of her biggest films, 9 to 5, with my gal Dolly Parton in there. But it's literally based off of that you're working for a man who's expecting sexual favors and he's not listening to secretaries. And that movie had a huge impact on secretaries forming unions and creating laws. So even though it might seem frivolous that like, yeah, she was a feminist in a movie, you can see how like the impacts are real.
Yeah.
And this is maybe a little sidetrack, but this is why what you see in film and television as far as representation and things like that are so important, because what you see in your media can become the reality.
Yeah.
If you look at something like Jaws, people weren't scared of sharks before Jaws. And now people all over the world are scared of sharks. If people see a fin in the water, they will run. And so that's why it's so important that we need to see women in important roles in film. And we can't see like Black people only playing maids and thugs. And, you know, you can go on forever. But she understood that at least and has been actively working towards it. And even with Grace and Frankie, the representation of like an older generation that's rarely seen on screen, let alone seen on screen in a way that has like dignity, is really nice.
In a way that like speaks to everybody.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Like,
like I watch it and love it, and I'm not.
My parents watch it and love it. You know, my grandparents do. Like, I love that.
Exactly. And most recently, she's been very active against climate change. She does Fire Drill Fridays, where she will protest and occupy different parts of the city and gets arrested constantly. And so obviously with the pandemic, she's an older lady, hasn't been able to protest because of COVID. But if you followed her on Instagram, she would post literally every Friday being like, yep, getting arrested again. Yep, getting arrested again. And it's just iconic. Her Instagram's just like her talking about, you know, going to the Oscars in the past, getting arrested, or like doing workouts. And I'm like, yes, Jane,
that's what you call like a well-rounded woman.
Like and so I just love her. I do feel like to really get the full scope of her, like you can read her book or watch the HBO documentary, because I especially love in the documentary how she's talking about her like hair epiphanies that she has, and each phase of her life has like a different hairstyle, and she's like, I'm gonna be blonde now, this is my time of life, which I just love. But
and there's also just like, since I have seen the documentary, like based on your suggestion, like you kind of going through this, like there's just something about seeing her in the documentary talking about this stuff that you are just like, I don't know, it's just so powerful, and like you just get her vibe instantly. And it just I could picture like her sitting down saying these things while you were saying it on the podcast, you know what I mean? Like, it is a really good documentary. It's on Crave for Canadian listeners.
Anywhere where you can watch HBO. But so that's the woman who inspires me. I'm just like obsessed with her because I think she's, not only is she just like cool and a badass, but she genuinely cares for things and doesn't care if it impacts her negatively to fight the good fight. Which I think is honorable.
And she's involved in so many things in a very genuine way. You know what I mean? Like, I don't know. I think that's something I struggle with, where like I'm a very empathetic person, and like I really care about everybody, and like I, you know, I follow the news, like I care, but I have a hard time like getting involved in everything in a meaningful way. You know what I mean? And I feel like that's what she does. And she does it so well. And like you said, she's like, this is important to me, like you said. And she doesn't care what the repercussions are. And like, she's using, like you said, she comes from like a family of fame and everything. And she's realized that like having that kind of, and help her career and like get all of that, like she's putting it to good use, which I think is so admirable.
I also wanted to say she has a really good interview with Oprah where
sign me up.
I think it's a video, but I listened to like a podcast version of it, but it's with Jane Fonda's adopted daughter, but it's very good. And so it's mostly about her adopted daughter, but it does go a little bit into Jane's life. So if you love Oprah, it's a good one.
Honestly, Oprah, she is a honorable mention.
Put her on the list.
For women who inspire us. 100%.
So what about you, Sadie, who's another woman who inspires you?
So, okay. Well, the next woman who inspires me that I want to talk about is a woman named Elaine Welteroth. And if you are somebody who reads a lot of magazines or like you're very like into kind of the fashion kind of like editorial space, you are 100% familiar with her. But if you're not and you've never heard her name before, that is okay. I'm going to give you a little background on her and tell you all about her. So Elaine is best known for becoming the youngest editor-in-chief in Condé Nast history when she was appointed the role at Teen Vogue in 2017. So what I like really relate to her about is that she grew up in a small town in California, and she really had to make a name for herself in New York and in the magazine industry from the ground up. She had no connections really. Like, she was just like, this is my dream and I'm going to find a way to make it happen. And I feel like, you know, on a much smaller scale, I relate to that. Like with my story, just like moving to Toronto after growing up in a small town outside of the city, not knowing anybody and being like, I have dreams, so I'm going to figure out a way to make it work. So how Elaine made it work, or how she got her foot in the door, was literally cold calling an editor she looked up to. And after a lot of persistence, aka every day phone calling this editor, talking to her assistant, the assistant eventually gave in and was like, I will give you like 10 minutes to talk to this editor on the phone and just to shut you up kind of thing. But she ended up chatting with this editor, and 5 months later, this editor called her up and offered her a job at Ebony. And that was her first job and how she broke into the magazine industry. So crazy enough, another honorable mention for women who inspire us is Michelle Obama. And Michelle Obama was actually Elaine's first cover shoot at Ebony, which is, I would say, a sign that she's doing what she's meant to be doing. Like, if you show up to the first day of work and it's like, hey, how about you meet Michelle Obama? It's like, that's a sign that you're in the right spot at the right time. So anyways, after that, she spent a decade building her career of becoming a magazine editor and ended up becoming the second Black editor and the youngest editor ever at Condé Nast in their 107-year history. And if you don't know what Condé Nast is, it's essentially like the giant publishing company that owns a lot of print magazines, most notably, obviously, Vogue, Teen Vogue, and a whole bunch of other publications. I think kind of where we get into, so of course, you know, we can already see that she was like very determined to chase her dreams and everything like that. How I like really got to know her story was by reading her book, More Than Enough. I recommend like everybody read this book. I have some like quotes. I'm going to kind of get into like the impact she had at Teen Vogue in a bit, but I have some quotes that I'm going to throw in there. They're all from her book. And if you're like wanting to hear more about her history, more about her career, I just highly recommend you read her book. But anyways, high level, the impact she had at Teen Vogue. So in her role at Teen Vogue, she was determined to give space for young women and people to use their voices and advocate for change. Under her leadership, the magazine had more content focused on politics and social justice, including critical coverage of the 2016 U.S. presidential election. She's been credited for getting American tweens, which I hate that word so much, but tweens and teens reading about politics. She essentially was saying how she really just wanted to create space and for people to stop underestimating the power and essentially just like stop underestimating young people in general and start, you know, actually paying attention and giving credit to younger generations. So she was also the first editor at Teen Vogue to invite activists to serve as guest editors and ensured that the cover stars and article content was diverse and represented all readers regardless of their race, their culture. Just everybody was represented. So she ensured, you know, Indigenous, South Asian, East Asian, Black, Muslim, all of those backgrounds and stories were represented in the pages of her Teen Vogue issues. One of my favorite quotes from her book is, "In order to change the stories, you must change the storytellers." And I think when we go back to 2 episodes ago or whenever we were talking about, you know, is creating your own business like what you should do, or, you know, I brought up this point of my idea to start my own business is to create change. I want things done in the right way. I want things done my way, but not just my way, but like that aligns with my values and like the greater good of the world, whatever. I feel like, well, I also said in that episode how sometimes, and what I'm coming to learn is that, you can actually create a lot of change, a lot of positive change, more impact by working with these large corporations and companies that have actual power rather than just, starting your own small business on the side.
Mm-hmm.
But anyways, I feel like Elaine is really the perfect example of how you can create change and make an impact from the inside out and from an inside of a really large corporation. When you think of Condé Nast, they were around for 107 years before they had like 2 black editors. Like, that's insane, and she was 29 when she was the youngest editor ever. It's just for a teen magazine. Like, I don't know.
Yeah.
It's just, she was definitely a trailblazer in the space. Elaine was also, I feel like one thing I really admire about Elaine is that she's always like embracing change. And I feel like in her book, she talks a lot about how she really leaned into digitizing Teen Vogue. So this is, back in 2007, 2008-ish, or 2017, 2018-ish, where, social media is really becoming a big thing. So she was embracing social media by hosting Facebook Lives, creating a YouTube channel, and she also was updating the website to something very similar to what it is now. And why this is so important really is, of course, showing that she's embracing change and embracing, connecting with younger people with where they actually are. But this magazine, like Teen Vogue, is actually no longer in print. It's strictly digital with their social media and website presence. And I feel like she really kind of like put the foundation in place. But there's a lot of that in her book. I think what is the most inspiring to me, though, about Elaine's story is she really struggled with her identity. And I feel like I didn't talk about this too much in like her background, but this is something that comes through a lot in her book. But she basically said she always kind of lived in the in-between, and she really struggled with her identity. So for instance, the biggest thing was she wasn't white enough to fit in with the white kids, but she wasn't black enough to fit in with the black kids either. And like this was a big kind of piece of her childhood and like her figuring out who she is, where she belongs, and that sort of thing. So identity is a huge piece to her. And what I find so inspiring and admirable is even though she struggled with this sense of identity, I feel like everything she's accomplished, she's done by being 100% authentic to herself. And I think that is just so admirable. Another quote from her book is, "Sometimes just being yourself is the radical act. When you occupy space in systems that weren't built for you, your authenticity is your activism." So I obviously can't relate to struggling with my identity when it comes to race. And I feel like even struggling with my identity in general, that isn't something that I've really like dealt with. I've always kind of had a pretty clear vision of like who I am, what I want to do, that sort of thing. But that being said, I really value my sense of identity, and it's really important and fascinating to me. So I feel like that's why I'm just like so inspired by her, you know what I mean? And like that part of her story. So Elaine is now 35 years old. She's still crazy young, honestly. And I feel like that's another reason why I wanted to include her on this list is she was young when she was accomplishing these things in her career, but she's still so young and continuing to do really cool things. So she no longer works in publishing. She's not at Teen Vogue anymore, but she's pivoting her career as she accomplishes her goals, she accomplishes her dreams, and she's still embracing change as she continues to grow and learn. Another quote that I heard in an interview with her is, "Your life is a series of dreams realized." That one really hit home. I was just like, ooh, love that. Me as the goal setter, you know, the absolute dreamer. I was like, yes, Elaine, love it. So essentially, this is who Elaine is and why I chose her as a woman who inspires me to talk about with you guys today. If you're also interested, you know, in learning more about her, obviously follow her on social media. And she has her book More Than Enough, which was a New York Times bestseller, but she also has a masterclass all about pivoting your career, finding, you know, how to line up your passions with your values and those sorts of things. It's called Designing Your Career. I don't know if I just said that, but I haven't taken it, but I really want to. And I think it's really, really good. It maybe came out just like last year or 2 years ago. And you might also see her if you watch Project Runway because she is a judge on the show. But that is all I wanted to really say about her. I'll leave you guys with one last quote, which I think is extremely relevant to today's episode. But when women affirm women, it unlocks our power. It gives us permission to shine brighter.
I love that.
Right? Me too.
I love that, especially because I feel like there's a myth that, say a company's diversifying, it's like all the women have to compete for the one good spot at the top.
Yes.
When it's like, that's not how it works. If one woman succeeds, it's like paving the way for the rest.
Exactly.
I love that.
Yeah. And I even think about our podcast, you know, like when we go back to talking about our podcast guests that we are so obsessed with, like we love being like women. And like, you know, having women listeners be a large part of our listeners, but then we also want to empower other women by bringing them on our podcast, talking about whatever it is that they're passionate about and experts in. And I feel like it's just like a great way, like you said, to support each other and like, help each other, like lift each other up rather than being like competing. Yeah. You know?
Yeah. Also, fun fact, my husband's met her.
Oh, yes. You told me that. At We Day, which checks out. I mean, obviously, you know, we won't talk too much about that, but she's just like an advocate for youth, you know, and
exactly
younger generation. So definitely checks out.
Great. Well, I think that's where we're going to leave it for this week. I hope that you feel inspired and are maybe thinking about the women who inspire you. It would be really awesome if you could share like on our Instagram some of the women who inspire you, even if it's like my mom. I would still love to hear that.
Honestly, my mom inspires me so much.
And I hope that everyone has an amazing Women's Day, whether you're a woman or not. It's an awesome day. And I want to thank you so much for listening this week. We put out a new episode every single Tuesday, so make sure you're subscribed to us. Give us a rating if you enjoyed this episode. And in between the episode drops, you can find us on social media at Our Golden 20s. We're on Instagram, Facebook, TikTok, Pinterest, Spotify, and we also have a Patreon page, which is the best way to show your support for the podcast. Thank you so much for listening.
See you next Tuesday.